The dawn over Drake's Rest erupted in fire. A world of quiet industry and distant trade lanes now trembled under the weight of war. The sky burned as Xortal dropships pierced the stratosphere, their angular hulls slicing through the clouds like obsidian blades, leaving trails of crackling energy. The invasion had begun. Aboard the battleship Varashikun, General Uraz Khan watched with the amusement of a predator toying with dying prey. The reports had been clear. Humans were no warriors. Pests. Barely intelligent enough to assemble crude defenses, let alone fight a real war. Their colonies? Brittle. Their technology? Outdated. Their tactics? Laughable. This wasn't a battle. This was pest control. Uraz Khan shifted his weight, segmented exoskeletal plates grinding with a faint chitinous rasp. His body, a grotesque fusion of organic muscle and hardened carapace, bore the scars of 100 conquests. Patches of sickly bioluminescent flesh pulsed irregularly beneath jagged plating, giving him the eerie appearance of something half-formed, eternally caught between evolution and decay. His jaw, lined with asymmetrical fangs, curled slightly as he exhaled, releasing a faint mist of acrid vapor from the slits along his throat. His kind had long outgrown the need for uniformity. The Xortal were survivors, adapted to the brutality of deep space warfare, their forms shifting and mutating across generations of engineered combat. Some bore additional arms, elongated and spined like deep-sea horrors. Others had translucent patches of skin, revealing the pulsing fluids that sustained them. Uraz Khan himself had never concerned himself with aesthetics, only efficiency. If his body had become a war-forged monstrosity, then so be it. "Deploy the vanguard," he ordered, his voice a rumble of authority. "Let them see what real soldiers look like." The first wave hit the ground in perfect synchronization. Xortal troops poured out in disciplined ranks, their bio-armors gleaming under the rising sun. They moved like a tide, advancing across the broken plains outside the colony's perimeter. Forward scouts reported minimal resistance. The humans were there, scattered through defensive positions, but already something was off. A barrage of human missiles erupted from concealed launchers within the city's outskirts. The Xortal braced, their shield emitters humming to life, expecting a devastating, coordinated strike. Instead, the chaos that followed left them momentarily stunned. Missiles spiraled like wounded birds, one streaking toward the clouds before detonating in empty sky. Another veered at an impossible angle, obliterating an abandoned marketplace with no strategic value. One missile exploded mid-air, as if it had lost the will to continue. A few curved so violently off course that they nearly struck human positions instead. Uraz Khan narrowed his eyes. "Are they missing?" he muttered, more to himself than to his officers. "Confirmed, General," one of his aides reported. "Their targeting systems must be failing." A low, condescending chuckle escaped him. "They fight like children," he scoffed. "Pathetic." The Xortal pressed forward, now unbothered by the so-called defensive bombardment. Through their visor displays, they could see human soldiers repositioning within the city, moving with what should have been urgency. A squad of Xortal heavy infantry advanced down a wide avenue, flanked by the smoldering remains of transport wrecks. Across the road, human troops emerged from behind makeshift barricades. At least 24 of them, aiming rifles, preparing for their last pitiful stand. The Xortal warriors shifted into formation, raising their weapons in unison, ready to cut them down. The humans opened fire. Energy pulses and projectile rounds streaked across the avenue. And missed. One shot, erratic and weak, zipped past the helmet of a Xortal soldier, close enough for him to flinch. He took an instinctive step back before realizing what had happened. His commander let out a sharp, clicking chitter, his secondary throat slits vibrating with amusement as he clapped him on the shoulder. "See? Even when they try, they fail. Perhaps I should remove my helmet to give them a fair chance." A few rounds sparked against debris, some shattered against a nearby communications tower, but not a single shot found its mark. A pause, then laughter. The Jortal troops exchanged glances, some turning to their unit commanders for confirmation. Was this real? Were the humans actually this inept? One of them, an officer with deep violet plating on his exosuit, stepped forward and spread his arms wide, standing in full view of the human positions. He turned slightly, shaking his head in mock disappointment. They tremble at our presence, yet they cannot even aim straight. He tapped his armored chest plate twice. Go on, humans. Try again. I'll even count to 3 for you. He held up a clawed hand, extending one thick, segmented finger at a time. The humans kept firing. Another barrage of shots hit nothing but the air between them. The officer shook his head, chuckling. I could never have imagined something so lame, so pitiful. Another Jortal unit, advancing along the colony's southern edge, witnessed a different display of incompetence. A formation of human soldiers rushed into a defensive position behind what seemed to be an abandoned factory. The Jortal targeted their forward positions, preparing to neutralize them, but before they could, a series of explosions detonated across the industrial zone. The aliens halted their advance momentarily, expecting some kind of defensive maneuver. But the explosions weren't anywhere near them. Instead, they tore through empty loading docks, shattering conveyor lines, blowing apart long-abandoned storage units. A dust cloud rose, obscuring nothing of strategic importance. What? Are they aiming at? One of the officers muttered. They must be panicking, another suggested. They know they're outmatched. Uraz Khan, observing from orbit, watched the events unfold with amusement. Ridiculous, he said. Advance. Crush them. He leaned forward slightly, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction as another volley of human artillery detonated uselessly in the distance. The battle was progressing exactly as expected, if it could even be called a battle. These weren't warriors. They were vermin, scattering before the inevitable. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. I will lead the next wave myself, he declared. These creatures are so pitiful, so utterly beneath us, that it would be an insult to let my subordinates claim the final victory. Prepare my transport. I want to see their failure with my own eyes. His officers bowed their heads in silent obedience. None questioned his decision. Why would they? There was no risk, no true resistance, only the pleasure of stepping onto conquered ground and taking what was already his. Across the colony, the Jortal invasion force surged forward, emboldened by the sheer absurdity of human resistance. Reports flooded in from the field. Humans were disorganized, unable to hit their targets, their defenses ineffective. On the eastern front, an armored division of Jortal siege walkers marched toward the heart of the city. As they advanced, human artillery shells rained down, completely missing their intended targets. Some shells buried themselves in the soil, detonating uselessly. Others collapsed entire sections of the street behind the advancing Jortal, but failed to hinder their momentum. One Walker commander, Jakar Null, let out a low growl of satisfaction as his squad pressed forward. His bulky frame was twisted with layers of hardened exoskeletal plating, his left arm grotesquely overgrown into a mass of calcified ridges that pulsed faintly with every step. Unlike the rank and file, whose forms were more stable, the higher castes bore the marks of deliberate genetic engineering. One of his secondary limbs, smaller and insectoid, twitched near his abdomen, gripping a combat blade designed for carving through armor. His deep-set, milky eyes lacked pupils, giving him the unsettling gaze of a predator that hunted by motion rather than sight. This is not a war, he sneered, watching as another round of shells exploded harmlessly in the distance. This is extermination. Let's see how long the cattle can run before they fall. The Jortal troops, emboldened by their enemy's incompetence, moved without hesitation. The humans, unable to aim, unable to defend, unable to pose any real threat, would fall before nightfall. Victory was inevitable. And so the Zortal marched forward, unaware that with humans, appearances are always deceiving. The ruins of Drake's Rest trembled beneath the relentless march of the Zortal. Their armored ranks moved in perfect sync, boots striking against the cracked pavement as they pressed deeper into the colony. Smoke coiled through shattered avenues, rising in thick plumes from burning structures and collapsed overpasses. The humans had been broken before they had even begun to fight. Jakarnul stepped over the remains of a civilian transport, its frame twisted and charred beyond recognition. His secondary arms twitched slightly, claws flexing as he surveyed the city's remains. The battle, if it could even be called that, was proceeding exactly as expected. His forces had swept through the outer districts with barely a challenge. The humans' weapons were laughable, their resistance feeble. The second wave of transports touched down, reinforcing the Zortal advance. This time, leading the charge, Uraz Khan emerged from the main assault craft. His towering frame moved with slow, deliberate confidence, armored plating catching the dim morning light. The spines along his back shifted as he surveyed the battlefield. The air reeked of destruction, charred metal, scorched earth, and the acrid vapor from his breathing slits. He inhaled deeply, watching what remained of human defenses collapse like brittle stone. Pitiful. There was no glory in crushing something so fragile. "Make it quick," he growled, his voice a low, guttural command that carried across the ranks. "They are already broken. Sweep them aside and be done with it." His warriors saluted in unison, their movements crisp and disciplined. There was no hesitation. The humans had failed to justify even a moment's concern. Uraz Khan strode forward, his steps steady as his troops surged ahead. Soon, he would stand at the heart of this colony, watching it fall. Nothing could stop them now. "General Uraz Khan," Jakarnul transmitted over the command link, his voice a low growl of satisfaction. "Eastern District is secured. No meaningful resistance. The humans scatter like insects before us." A flicker of static, then the general's voice rumbled through his earpiece. "As was predicted. Continue advancing. Push them toward the colony center. Let them understand what it means to be prey." Jakarnul clicked his mandibles in approval and gestured for his troops to continue. The vanguard moved forward, sweeping the abandoned streets, crushing debris beneath heavy boots. Still, there was something odd. His gaze landed on a crater beyond his position, too precise to be random, yet seemingly harmless. It had been carved by a misplaced human mortar strike. At first, he dismissed it, just as he had ignored all their pathetic attempts at defense. But this one, specifically, had collapsed an entire avenue leading back to the outskirts. The humans had cut off their own retreat. Strange. His claws flexed slightly as he turned, surveying the battlefield. Scattered wreckage, unexploded ordnance embedded in useless locations, buildings demolished where no one had been hiding. He exhaled sharply, shoving the thought aside. Coincidence? He pressed forward. The colony's central boulevard stretched ahead, its towering administrative structures still standing. A fitting place to crush whatever remained of human resistance. The vanguard battalions were already converging, carving through the last pockets of defenders. Soon, nothing would remain. His communicator flared to life. "Commander Jakarnul, this is Scout Team Ulvas. We have secured the southern sector. Human casualties minimal. They appear to have retreated ahead of our advance." Jakarnul's mandibles twitched. Retreated or fled? A brief pause. "Difficult to say, sir. No bodies, only empty defensive positions. And there is something else." Jakarnul narrowed his eyes. "Speak." "Some of the structures collapsed as we approached. Not from our weapons. It was as if they were deliberately weakened, timed to fall when we arrived." He felt the first stirrings of irritation but kept his voice neutral. "You are overthinking this, Ulvas. They flee like cowards, and their ruins collapse because they were never meant to withstand a real army." "Understood, sir," the scout responded. though there was hesitation in his voice. Jakar Nul ended the transmission, dismissing the unease gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. He had fought in too many campaigns to be troubled by human incompetence. Ahead, another squad moved into position at the entrance to the central plaza. As they closed in, a twisted lamppost, long severed from its base, creaked and toppled sideways, directly into their path. The squad barely had time to react before the weight of it slammed down, sending 2 warriors sprawling. A third was caught directly under it, his chitinous armor cracking with a wet snap. His body twitched once, then stilled. Jakar Nul's claws curled into fists. A trickle of doubt entered his mind. The humans were pathetic soldiers, of that there was no question. But they were builders, engineers. They were one of the few species in the known galaxy that had expanded through sheer ingenuity rather than brute strength. Could it be that? No. Impossible. The humans were losing. They were retreating. That was the truth. And yet, Jakar Nul's comlink crackled as another officer reported in. "Commander, we are proceeding toward the main district, but something is wrong. The humans' incompetence is slowing our advance." Jakar Nul narrowed his eyes. "Explain." "Their artillery. Those idiots keep missing, but their shells are tearing up the roads ahead. We've encountered several craters blocking direct routes. It's forcing us to adjust course." A flicker of irritation ran through Jakar Nul's mind. Then adjust. A few holes in the ground are nothing more than an inconvenience. "Yes, sir. We're rerouting. No significant delay." The transmission cut off, and Jakar Nul exhaled through his mandibles, shaking his head. Even in death, the humans were a nuisance. They couldn't aim, they couldn't fight, and now they couldn't even lose properly without making a mess of the battlefield. He dismissed the thought and refocused on the march ahead. A second voice, this one from an officer stationed on the far western flank, broke in. "Sir, we are experiencing unexpected disruptions in our sensor readings." "Explain." "Localized interference. At first we thought it was atmospheric conditions, but it is spreading. Some units have lost access to their targeting systems." Jakar Nul's clawed fingers drummed against his thigh. The unease that had begun as a whisper was now pressing against his mind with greater force. His soldiers, however, remained oblivious. The Xhortal continued their march, pushing toward the center of Drake's Rest. The plaza loomed ahead, a final stronghold before absolute victory. The humans had been routed. There was nothing left but to crush them. And yet, as Jakar Nul looked around at the streets behind them, something was wrong. The debris, the collapsed roads, the way the city seemed to fold inward, constricting paths that should have remained open. He looked down at the fallen street lamp, then at the carefully placed craters, and finally at the towering structures around them, still standing. For the first time, a whisper of doubt slithered through his mind. Were the humans truly retreating, or were they simply waiting for them to step deeper into the cage? The advance into the colony's core was relentless. Xhortal warriors moved in disciplined formations, their exoskeletal armor gleaming under the thickening haze of battle. General Uraz Khan led from the front now, his towering form cutting through the smoke-choked streets as his forces pressed into the last human defenses. It should have been over already. Yet something gnawed at him. His mandibles twitched in irritation as he surveyed the field. The humans had stopped firing. No resistance, no last desperate counterattack. Just empty streets and the eerie silence of a battlefield that had gone unnaturally quiet. Jakar Nul's voice crackled through the command link, his tone edged with restrained frustration. "Eastern and western flanks have encountered more obstructions, General. Roads are collapsing behind us, making rerouting a nuisance." Uraz Khan exhaled sharply through his breathing slits. Unstable infrastructure. These cities were never built to withstand real war. Press forward. "Understood," Jakar Nul replied, but there was hesitation in his voice. Uraz Khan turned his gaze skyward, The thick clouds of dust and debris that had been rising since the initial bombardment were beginning to coalesce into something denser, hanging over the city like a storm that refused to break. There was a time when he had respected the adaptability of lesser species, how they clawed their way through evolution, desperate and erratic. But the humans, they were unremarkable. Their biology was fragile, their weapons primitive. The only reason they had survived so long was because the galaxy had underestimated them. And yet, something here was wrong. A vibration rumbled through the ground beneath his feet. He turned. Behind them, a portion of the street caved inward, swallowing a transport vehicle in an avalanche of rock and concrete. A deep, gaping chasm yawned where a reinforced road had been moments before. A ripple of confusion passed through the ranks. A field officer, his plated armor marked with the insignia of the armored division, approached quickly. His secondary arms twitched against his torso in a gesture of unease. "General, we have encountered more collapses. Several of our forward units have lost their retreat paths." Uraz Khan's mandibles pressed together. "Then they will move forward. I did not come here to listen to excuses." The officer hesitated. "That is, not all. Our communications are degrading. Long-range signals are..." Static hissed through the command link, cutting him off. A faint pulse of interference hummed at the back of Uraz Khan's skull. The officer tapped his visor controls, frustration creeping into his posture. "It is spreading, General. Some units have gone silent." Uraz Khan bared his fangs. Coincidence. That was all it was. He turned his gaze back to the advancing forces. His warriors still moved with brutal efficiency, clearing buildings, pushing deeper into the colony's interior. He could hear Jakar Nul's battalions establishing their foothold ahead, their march steady, their discipline unshaken. And yet, something in the atmosphere had shifted. He exhaled slowly, watching as the swirling dust thickened, reducing visibility. The humans hadn't disappeared. A realization crept over him, cold and insidious. They were waiting. Another cave-in rumbled through the city. This one was louder, deeper. Structures trembled as unseen charges detonated in succession, cutting off yet another main route leading back to the outskirts. Uraz Khan's claws tightened into fists, not coincidence. He turned to the nearest officer. "Establish direct visual relay with all forward squads. I want to know where every battalion is positioned." The officer tapped his device. Nothing. "The feeds are down, General." Uraz Khan's eyes narrowed. His breathing slits flared. He needed clarity, now. "Jakar Nul," he barked into the command link. "Report." Silence. He tried again. Static. Something deep in Uraz Khan's gut twisted. An instinct honed from centuries of war. A pattern. A trap. The humans weren't retreating. They were guiding us into their kill zone. His mind snapped into action. "All units, reform at primary positions. Do not advance until I give the order." No response. The interference was spreading. A piercing wail echoed from a block ahead. A scout, disoriented, stumbled back from an alleyway, his breathing erratic. His armor was intact, no wounds, but his eyes were wide with something that Zortal warriors were not meant to feel. Fear. Uraz Khan stalked forward, his presence towering over the scout. "Report," he growled. The warrior sucked in a breath, his secondary arms twitching uncontrollably. "Sir, my unit was right there, I swear. Then, just like that, they were gone." His voice trembled, the rigid control of a Zortal soldier fracturing at the edges. Uraz Khan's fangs bared in irritation. "What do you mean, gone?" The scout swallowed hard. "No gunfire, no explosions. We entered the sector, and then the dust. It got thicker, the air changed, and..." He exhaled sharply, as if trying to grasp something slipping through his fingers. I turned, and they weren't there anymore. A cold weight settled in Uraz Khan's chest. "Get back into formation," he commanded. We are regrouping. The scout hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding sharply and retreating into the ranks. A voice crackled through the static, faint, distant. General, Jakar Nul. Uraz Khan's mandibles twitched. Report. Something is wrong. Jakar Nul's voice was steadier than the scout's, but there was an edge to it now. Our forward units are encountering increasing obstructions, collapsed pathways, dead signals. My men are advancing blind. And your visual feeds? Compromised. The dust storms. There's something in them. Some form of interference. It is not natural. The words sank into Uraz Khan like a blade. Not natural. He had ignored the anomalies for too long. The absurd misfires, the misplaced mortars, the collapsing roads. None of it had been chance. The battlefield was shifting. Not through brute force, not through numbers, through something far worse. An invisible cage constructed long before the battle even started. A strategy designed before the war had even begun. The silence that had smothered the battlefield fractured with the first shot. A sharp, cracking sound cut through the thick air, barely audible over the distant rumble of collapsing structures. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then, a Zortal officer, standing rigid at the center of an advancing battalion, stumbled forward, his mandibles twitching in confusion. A thin line of dark ichor traced down the side of his helmet, then his legs gave out. He hit the ground, dead before his body fully registered the impact. Another shot. Another officer crumpled. The effect rippled outward, confusion spreading through the ranks like a contagion. Zortal warriors hesitated, their tight formations suddenly fraying as soldiers instinctively shifted, scanning for the source of the attack. Uraz Khan's eyes narrowed. "Find those shooters! Now!" He barked into his command link. Static. His jaw tightened. The interference had worsened. He turned sharply to his second in command. "Send out visual spotters. We cannot rely on our sensors." The ground erupted. An explosion detonated near the forward lines, a low-yield blast that sent armored bodies flying. The force was controlled, precise, not meant for destruction, but disruption. Another explosion followed, then another. They weren't targeting the bulk of the Zortal forces. They were severing their lines, driving wedges between squads, cutting units off from each other. The humans weren't simply attacking, they were dismantling. A soldier to Uraz Khan's left convulsed, his weapon sparking as it shut down in his hands. He let out a clicking hiss of confusion, slapping at the controls, trying to reactivate the power cells. Around him, others were experiencing the same failure. Plasma rifles sputtered and died. Heavy cannons fell silent. Even the auxiliary targeting visors blinked out, one by one, leaving warriors blinking uselessly at dimming HUDs. Electromagnetic pulses. Uraz Khan's mind sharpened with realization. The humans had let them advance, let them push deep into the heart of Drake's Rest. Not because they were weak, but because they were setting the stage. A cold, creeping dread settled into the pit of his gut. They hadn't taken this city. They had walked into a kill box. A sharp crack split the air. Suddenly a squad leader to his right jerked backward, the side of his head splitting open from the impact. The officer beside him barely had time to register the death before another shot hit home, dropping him in an instant. "Snipers!" a Zortal warrior bellowed. "We are exposed!" The word sent a ripple of understanding through the troops. They had no cover. They had stormed into an urban maze designed by engineers, designed by builders who understood angles, sightlines, fields of fire. The humans had not positioned themselves in desperate, scattered pockets. They had positioned themselves to shoot downward, from the ruins and shadows, from unseen perches where their rounds would find the most valuable targets first. Uraz Khan had seen routes before. He had led them, crushed enemy forces under the weight of superior firepower and numbers. But this was different. His forces were not being overwhelmed in a great clash of armies. They were being suffocated piece by piece, their structure dissolving beneath them. A heavy explosion sounded from the western district. A moment later, the command link crackled, barely holding a signal. General, we are—" The voice broke, distorted by static. "The streets! Collapsing! We have lost! Kazet! Company! Separated! Kazet! Trapped!" The signal vanished. Uraz Khan turned his gaze sharply to the western front, but he could see nothing through the thickening dust. He clenched his claws. He had underestimated them. The humans weren't fighting like an army. They were hunting. A faint whir sounded in the distance, a soft mechanical noise, too subtle for most to catch amid the chaos. But Uraz Khan's ears, honed by decades of war, detected it instantly. Drones. His head snapped upward. Small, barely visible shapes glided through the thick dust. Sleek machines, silent as ghosts. He saw the moment one of them flickered, an EMP burst, discharging from its underside. More of his warriors stumbled as their weapons failed. Others reached for communication relays that no longer functioned. The humans weren't just picking them off, they were cutting them off. "General!" Jakar Nul's voice finally cut through the static, thick with barely restrained anger. "We are losing cohesion! The enemy is everywhere and nowhere! My battalions, I have lost contact with half of them. I can't re-establish order. They are falling apart!" Uraz Khan clenched his claws. His warriors were the finest of the Jortal Dominion. He had brought overwhelming strength to this battlefield. And yet, against these engineers, these so-called primitive tacticians, they were bleeding. He turned sharply, mandibles clicking as he looked for a sign, anything that would give him back control. Instead, he saw shadows moving through the smoke. Human shadows. At first they were indistinct figures, barely visible through the shifting haze. But then, they stepped forward, silent, calculated. Not an advancing force. Not an army breaking through lines. These were specialists. The first went unnoticed until his blade plunged deep into a Jortal warrior's throat, severing vital arteries. No energy blasts. No sound beyond the wet gurgle of ichor spilling from the wound. A figure slipped from cover, fired a single suppressed shot, and vanished again. The Jortal he had shot staggered backward, clutching at the hole in his chest. Then another, and another. The humans weren't attacking in force. They were removing key pieces. The formation was no longer breaking. It was disintegrating. Uraz Khan's breathing deepened, his body tensing. "This is not possible," he muttered under his breath. A flicker of movement. One soldier fell, then a second, and a third. The humans moved like ghosts, striking and disappearing before his warriors could react. The Jortal were not used to this. They were conquerors. They were bred for open war, for breaking defenses through overwhelming force. They were not prey. And yet, as Uraz Khan looked across the battlefield, at the confusion, the fractured ranks, the warriors gripping weapons that no longer functioned, he realized the truth. The humans had never been running. They had been waiting. And now, the killing had truly begun. The first true sign of collapse wasn't the deaths. It wasn't the relentless precision of the human snipers or the drones severing their lines with silent, methodical efficiency. It was the hesitation. For the first time in the invasion, Jortal warriors hesitated. They flinched at shadows. They pivoted their heads too sharply at the sound of movement. They turned their backs, however briefly, from the enemy. And hesitation in war was fatal. Jakar Nul saw it before Uraz Khan did. He had spent decades leading forces on the ground, had seen battles turn when soldiers lost faith, when the certainty of victory twisted into a gnawing doubt. And here, on the streets of Drake's Rest, doubt had burrowed deep into the Jortal ranks like a spreading infection. A warrior from his own unit, one of the hardened assault troops that had marched without fear mere hours ago, stumbled toward him, mandibles clicking in something dangerously close to distress. "Commander!" The soldier's voice was tight, barely controlled. "The forward ranks are breaking. The humans—" "I know what they are doing," Jakar Nul snarled, cutting him off. The warrior flinched at the sharpness of the response, but Jakar-Nul had no time for reassurance. He scanned the battlefield, trying to piece together a defense. There was none. The Jortal formation was unraveling. The human forces weren't engaging in a traditional push. They weren't driving forward like an army seeking territory. They were collapsing the structure of the invasion from the inside out, slicing through the chain of command, carving the forces into scattered, disoriented fragments. Jakar-Nul's mind raced. They had to stabilize. They had to regroup. He turned toward his command link. "General, we must consolidate our forces. We have lost cohesion." "Silence!" Uraz Khan's voice growled through the static. Jakar-Nul clenched his mandibles in frustration, but held his tongue. The general did not see what he saw. Uraz Khan still believed in the war doctrine of the Jortal. Strength, dominance, brute force crushing all beneath it. But brute force required structure. It required an enemy that fought on the same terms. And the humans were not fighting a war. They were erasing them. A high-pitched scream from the left made Jakar-Nul's head snap around. A soldier had broken ranks entirely, abandoning his squad and sprinting toward the outskirts. His weapon dangled uselessly from his claws as he ran, not toward an objective, not toward cover, just away. The coward had taken 3 full strides before his head snapped backward, a silent projectile piercing his skull. His body tumbled forward, landing face first in the dust. Jakar-Nul clenched his mandibles. It had begun. A scout made a run for it, then another. It was like a chain reaction, panic spreading through the ranks like a wildfire, consuming discipline, reducing hardened soldiers to prey, driven by fear alone. The first deserter shattered the illusion of order. The first cracks of fear had widened into full fractures. "Stand your ground!" Jakar-Nul barked, but his voice was swallowed by the chaos. The snipers were accelerating the collapse. Drones flickered through the air, releasing bursts of targeted EMP pulses. Jortal equipment shorted out in quick succession, leaving warriors scrambling to reactivate their weapons. Some resorted to drawing close combat blades, looking wildly for enemies they could not see. The humans were in no hurry. They let the panic spread. Jakar-Nul snapped to the command link. "General, we are losing control of the field. We must withdraw now." Silence. Then, a deep, guttural exhale from Uraz Khan. "Retreat?" Jakar-Nul felt the cold weight of impending failure settle in his gut. "We are fragmented. If we do not establish a defensive perimeter, we will be enough." For the first time, there was something in Uraz Khan's tone that Jakar-Nul did not expect. Not anger, not defiance, not even frustration, but something far more dangerous for a commander in war: recognition. The general had seen it now. He had felt it. The trap had closed. Uraz Khan's voice came again, sharper now, full of command. "All forces, pull back to central position. Secure extraction routes immediately." The order rippled through what remained of their communication network, but the moment it did, Jakar-Nul knew. There were no extraction routes. There was no retreat. The humans had sealed every exit, and they had been waiting for Uraz Khan to issue the order. A sudden roar of engine thrusters tore through the sky. Jakar-Nul looked up sharply, his mind already piecing together the final part of the trap. Ships. The invasion transports. They had been positioned on standby since the second wave, waiting to extract forces if necessary. But they weren't moving. They weren't responding. Then, the first transport erupted into fire. A precise strike, not from heavy artillery, but from something controlled. A missile, fired from somewhere unseen. One moment, the transport had been intact. The next, it was a burning ruin, spiraling toward the streets below. Jakar-Nul's mandibles parted slightly. They had cut off the escape. The humans hadn't just predicted that the Jortal would try to fall back. They had planned for this. The retreat was chaos. What remained of the Jortal forces, fractured, bleeding, desperate, scrambled to reorganize. Uraz Khan knew the battle was lost, but the war, not yet. If he could extract even a fraction of his troops, regroup, and call for reinforcements, they could return in force. This world would still burn. If. Jack Arnold took charge first, his voice sharp and unwavering despite the carnage. Form defensive lines. Regroup at the outer perimeter. A crack. The warrior nearest to him jerked violently, a round piercing through the slits in his exoskeleton. He crumpled at Jack Arnold's feet, dark ichor spilling across the ground. Jack Arnold didn't flinch, but the others did. Then the shots. One more, and another. The perimeter was a lie. Every attempt to regroup only made them easier prey. The moment a squad consolidated, the humans cut them apart, methodical and unrelenting. "Commander," an officer stumbled toward him, panting. "We've lost all coordinated positioning. Units are scattering." Scattering. Jack Arnold's mandibles clicked. If they lost formation completely, this wouldn't be a retreat. It would be a massacre. "Hold your positions! Cover fire! Now!" Weapons raised. Disorganized bursts of plasma erupted into the dust-choked ruins. It didn't matter. Targeting systems flickered and died. Optics failed. Plasma rifles stuttered, overheating or refusing to fire. Soldiers aimed blind, pulling triggers on weapons that were barely functional. The response came instantly. Explosions. Not wild bombardments, surgical strikes. Detonations at key intersections. Buildings collapsing, closing off escape routes before the Jortal could even reach them. The fallback paths weren't just compromised, they were gone. Jack Arnold didn't need to look to know what the general was thinking. His eyes scanned the battlefield, not with fury, but with something far worse. Realization. "General!" Jack Arnold bellowed. "We cannot hold this position, we need—" "I know," Uraz Khan snapped. His voice, once the pillar of the invasion, now carried an edge of something unfamiliar. Not fear, not yet, but close. The momentary pause between them was shattered by a new sound, one that every warrior recognized instantly, the deep, vibrating howl of atmospheric entry. Jack Arnold's head snapped upward, so did Uraz Khan's. Above them, cutting through the smog-filled sky, streaks of fire descended like meteors. At first, some of the remaining Zortal dared to hope. Perhaps it was reinforcements. Perhaps command had finally responded to their distress signals. Then the first impact hit. A transport vessel, one of their own, disintegrated in mid-air. The explosion bloomed above them, sending charred metal and flaming debris cascading down into the ruins. The shattered hull carved through a squad still attempting to hold position. A second transport was struck before it even managed to lift off. The air was filled with the sounds of detonations. One after another, the escape vessels were being systematically eliminated. There was no hesitation, no mercy. Uraz Khan clenched his teeth so tightly they ached. He tapped his wrist communicator, forcing an override. All remaining transports lift off immediately. Full burn. Do not wait for full passenger loads. Move now. A response came, but not what he expected. "General, we cannot. The moment we gain altitude—" The voice cut out. Then another explosion. Uraz Khan turned just in time to see a transport, one of the last, tilting violently as a missile tore through its underbelly. The ship shuddered, spewing black smoke, before plummeting straight into the city below. Silence. For the first time, the battlefield was still. There were no more transports. No more escape. Jack Arnold exhaled, his fangs barely parting as he spoke through the quiet. "There's no way off this rock." The words felt heavier than the wreckage around them. Uraz Khan's throat slits flared, his mind working furiously. He refused to accept it. There was still one option: reinforcements. If they could hold long enough for a new fleet to arrive, they could still salvage something. He activated his primary communication relay, his claws moving swiftly over the interface. "Command, this is Uraz Khan. Priority 1 emergency distress signal. Immediate reinforcements required at Drake's Rest. Transmitting coordinates." Static. His mandibles twitched. He resent the signal. Nothing. His claws tightened against the control panel. He adjusted the frequency. bypassing standard channels. Still nothing. General, Jakar Nul stepped closer. He had seen this before. The way human interference crippled technology. Uraz Khan refused to accept it. He switched to backup frequencies, military encryption, wideband distress calls, no signal, no response, no anything. His eyes lifted toward the sky, toward the smog-covered void where his warships should have been monitoring their advance. But the only things in the sky now were the burning husks of their own transports. Then, a flicker, a pulse through the static. For a fraction of a second, hope. His claws moved fast over the console, latching onto the signal, expecting the voice of one of his fleet commanders. Some confirmation that reinforcements were coming, that the Dominion had not abandoned them. A voice crackled through, but it was not Jortal. General Uraz Khan. The voice was calm, steady, human. Uraz Khan's breathing slits flared. The voice continued, unbothered by the silence. No need to keep trying. There's no one left to hear you. Uraz Khan's heart pounded once, heavy. Then again. You fought well, the human went on, the amusement barely concealed beneath the words. Well, no, not really, but you certainly tried. A growl rumbled deep in Uraz Khan's chest. His claws flexed, pressing hard against the console as his mind reeled. The voice carried on, almost conversational now. Oh, and General. The human's voice carried a smirk, slow and measured. Hope you sent your last report. Would be a shame if no one got it. Oh, and General. The human's voice dripped with amusement. Hope you sent your last report. Would be a shame if no one got it. Silence. Uraz Khan's mind snapped to the intelligence briefings, the dismissive analyses, the certainty that the humans were insignificant. He had thought they were blind. He had thought them unprepared. He had been wrong. Tell me, General. The voice was almost conversational now. Still enjoying the invasion? Uraz Khan slammed his fist into the console. The transmission cut out. Silence. The air was thick with smoke and death. The once proud Zortal warriors, conquerors of 100 worlds, now stood fractured among the ruins of Drake's Rest. Fires burned in the distance, casting flickering shadows across shattered buildings and lifeless bodies. What remained of their forces clung to the last vestiges of discipline, forming ragged defensive lines against an enemy they could no longer see. Uraz Khan stood at the highest point of the rubble-strewn battlefield, his imposing frame silhouetted against the darkened sky. His breathing was slow, controlled. His exoskeletal plating, once immaculate, was now scorched and cracked. His war crest, a symbol of command, was stained with dust and the blood of his own kind. For the first time in his long, brutal career, there was no path forward, no warships in the sky, no reinforcements inbound, no escape. His mandibles clicked softly as he surveyed the battlefield. The Jortal had been reduced to pockets of desperate resistance, some still fighting, others faltering. Here and there, warriors dropped their weapons, raising their arms in surrender. Some tried to flee, scrambling over wreckage, vanishing into the labyrinthine ruins. None made it far. Sharp cracks of sniper fire echoed and bodies fell. They had been broken. And yet, he remained standing. Jakar Nul approached, his once imposing stride now burdened by exhaustion. He was bleeding from a wound along his side, the dark ichor staining his armor. His secondary arms twitched involuntarily, shock setting in, or rage. Perhaps both. The line is collapsing, Jakar Nul said, voice stripped of formality. More are surrendering by the minute. Uraz Khan did not turn to him immediately. He let the weight of the moment settle. He had always known how war ended for those who lost, but never for him. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm but edged with something dangerous. It is not shameful to recognize when you have been outplayed. Jakar Nul's expression darkened. Outplayed. His tone was incredulous, simmering with frustration. We were led into a slaughterhouse. Uraz Khan exhaled slowly. We were led into a battlefield shaped by their hands, not ours. We assumed brute force would break them. It did not. Jakar-Nul looked away, his claws tightening into fists. He did not deny it. Below, the last of their warriors made their final choices. Some stood firm, weapons still raised, refusing to surrender. They fought to the bitter end, only to be cut down with chilling accuracy by unseen human forces. There was no glory in their deaths, no grand charge, no final stand, just a slow, inevitable thinning of their numbers until none remained. Others attempted escape, darting into the ruins, seeking any path that would lead them away from this planet. The humans let them run. Then, like the closing of a steel trap, they cut them down. One by one. The message was clear. There was no leaving this battlefield, not on their terms. Uraz Khan's gaze lingered on those who had chosen surrender. They were kneeling now, their weapons discarded. Some held their heads high, defiant even in submission. Others trembled, their bodies betraying what their minds refused to acknowledge. He did not blame them. The Dominion had never prepared them for this. For an enemy that did not break. For an enemy that hunted. For an enemy that learned. Uraz Khan shifted his stance, his towering presence commanding silence among the surviving warriors around him. The Jortal had been forged for war. They had built their empire on the bones of weaker species. They had crushed civilizations under their boots, believing themselves unstoppable. Yet here, in this world, they had been undone. Not by superior numbers, not by overwhelming firepower, but by patience, by strategy. A faint smirk ghosted across his features, something that could have been amusement in another life. The humans had fought like no species he had ever encountered, and he had underestimated them. The humans have proven themselves. The words carried no bitterness, no rage, just fact. Jakar-Nul blinked twice, but he said nothing. Uraz Khan continued. We thought them weak. His gaze swept over the remnants of his army. We were wrong. Silence. The warriors who remained clung to his words, not because they expected salvation, but because they needed something, anything to anchor themselves. His slits flared as he exhaled. We are Jortal. His voice hardened. We do not kneel. We do not beg. If we fall with our heads high. A few of his warriors let out a soft, clicking growl, an instinctive response, a final flicker of defiance. Some tightened their grips on their weapons. Others hesitated. The humans were watching, waiting, and one by one more weapons hit the ground. The warriors who had once mocked human fragility now saw them for what they truly were. Hunters. The last of the Jortal heavy infantry collapsed under a single, precise shot. His exoskeletal plating, once a gleaming symbol of Dominion might, split open like brittle chitin as his body slumped against the remains of a shattered transport. The glow in his compound eyes dimmed. Then, he was still. Uraz Khan did not move. He watched as his finest warriors, genetically perfected, engineered for war, fell one by one. It was systematic, cold, deliberate, not the reckless counterattack of a desperate enemy, but an execution. He turned sharply, eyes sweeping across the battlefield. The city had become a death trap, every alleyway a funnel, every collapsed street an intentional obstruction. His forces were cut apart, their commanders dead, their chain of command shattered beyond repair. A tremor rumbled through the ground, a distant explosion. His gaze snapped toward the eastern quadrant. There, a transport vessel, upright, functioning, its hull scorched but intact. Its landing thrusters flickered weakly against the smoke-streaked skyline. His mind moved in an instant. That is my way out. He stepped forward, his heavy frame crushing debris beneath his boots. His command link flickered as he forced a transmission through the interference. All remaining units converge on... The transport exploded. For a single frozen moment, Uraz Khan's breathing slits flared, but no air came. His mandibles tensed, his exhale sharp and hollow. His way out was gone. The force of the blast ripped through the air like a silent shockwave, tearing metal apart in a blinding inferno of energy and shrapnel. The sound followed a fraction of a second later, a concussive roar that sent wreckage tumbling through the street. Uraz Khan staggered back, the sheer precision of the strike more devastating than the explosion itself. Not a stray shot, not the recklessness of a cornered enemy. A message. His mind reeled, his vision flickering between the carnage and the remaining pockets of his warriors still trying, foolishly, to hold ground. They had no ground to hold. He turned toward his last field commander, Jakar Nul, who had taken cover behind the twisted frame of a shattered artillery piece. His armor was scorched, his exoskeleton cracked in several places, but he was still standing, his two remaining warriors crouched at his flanks. Jakar Nul's gaze met Uraz Khan's, mandibles twitching. "General," he rasped, his voice raw from exertion. "We have no line. We have no communications. The humans have severed." The street behind them detonated. The collapse was immediate. The charred remnants of a barricade imploded, sending a cascade of stone, steel, and pulverized structures crashing down, cutting off the only open corridor leading westward. The humans had waited. They had waited for him to attempt one last order, one last attempt at control. And then they closed the door. He felt the heat of the blast against his back as he turned, his claws curling into fists. His voice, once a booming command, now rasped from his throat like the last breath of a dying beast. "Cease fire," he growled. Jakar Nul hesitated, his secondary hands twitching, his body tensing like a coiled predator still on instinct. "Sir, cease fire." A long silence stretched between them. The last Jortal, still holding weapons, looked toward him, their postures locked in a moment of disbelief. The final order of surrender had been given. One by one, weapons hit the ground. The battlefield stilled. A gust of wind cut through the ruins, carrying the acrid stench of burning metal and the smoldering remnants of their invasion. And then, they appeared. One human stepped from the dust, silhouette cutting against the firelight. A second followed, then more, until about 30 humans stood atop the shattered ridge of the colony ruins, their figures still, their rifles held loosely at their sides. They had not been an army. They had never needed to be. A single step echoed through the quiet as the lead human moved forward, his face illuminated by the faint embers of war still burning at his back. His armor was scratched and battered, his stance relaxed but unwavering. Uraz Khan met his gaze. There was no anger in the human's expression, no pride, just certainty, the kind that never questioned this outcome. A voice crackled through the silence. One of the humans, his tone steady, composed, carrying the weight of finality. "Central, this is Drake's Rest. The last target has been neutralized." A pause, then the final transmission. "The war is over." The signal cut out, and the battlefield was left with only the quiet hum of distant fire, the crackle of cooling wreckage, and the defeated exhale of an empire that had never truly understood the war it had waged. Uraz Khan did not lower his gaze. He simply stood, staring into the face of the enemy who had not only defeated him, but had planned his defeat before he had even arrived. And now, the rest of the galaxy would know. The humans did not fight like warriors. They never had to. Because while others waged war, they played the game to win. Hey there again. I'm glad you've come so far. Hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button. This is really important to the channel. Really important. And I have one more thing for you. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.